Right now, somewhere within reach of where you're sitting, there is something that changes how your brain works. Coffee, a cigarette, a drink, a pill you swallow every morning without even thinking about it. You probably don't call it a drug, but that's what it is. And the act of reaching for it, deliberately altering your own mind, is one of the oldest things a human being can do. Not thousands of years old. The evidence goes back so far that researchers genuinely aren't sure where it starts. In 2010, archaeologists opened a small leather pouch in a cave in southwestern Bolivia. It had been sitting there, untouched, for about 1,000 years. Inside was a wooden pipe, 2 decorated tablets, a tube carved from a fox snout, dried plant material, and traces of 5 distinct substances: harmine, bufotenine, dimethyltryptamine, cocaine, and benzoylecgonine. This wasn't someone's stash. This was a toolkit, a deliberate, carefully assembled kit for producing specific altered states in the human mind. In 2019, archaeologist Jose Capriles published the full analysis in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. His conclusion, the complexity of what was in that pouch, suggests a tradition that goes back much, much further. Whoever owned that pouch didn't discover these plants. They inherited the knowledge from someone who inherited it from someone before them, which means you're looking at the end of a chain, not the beginning. So, how far back does the chain actually go? The oldest directly dated evidence of psychedelic use in the Americas comes from a site in Texas called Shumla Cave. In 1996, anthropologist Phil Wilk analyzed a dried peyote cactus that had been placed deliberately in a ceremonial context. Radiocarbon dating put it at 5,700 years ago. But here's what that number doesn't tell you. Peyote traditions among indigenous groups in North America are so old, so deeply embedded in ritual, so systematized, that most researchers believe the actual start of use is far earlier. The plant just doesn't preserve well. Most of the evidence is already gone. What you're seeing at 5,700 years is not the beginning. It's the first moment the evidence survived long enough for you to find it. Go further back, to Europe, 8,000 years ago. Before the wheel, before writing, before anyone in the region had a metal tool of any kind, opium poppies were being deliberately farmed across Western Europe. Not growing wild, farmed. The seeds show up in Neolithic sites across Spain, France, Germany, and Switzerland, in concentrations that make no sense as food. In the Swiss lake dwellings, settlements built on wooden platforms above lakes around 6,000 years ago, poppy seeds were found in such quantities that researchers concluded they were a significant crop. Grown, harvested, and processed specifically for what they did to the human mind. Someone 8,000 years ago, with no written language and no metal tools, had figured out that a specific plant processed in a specific way produced a specific effect, and they decided that effect was worth farming for. Think about that the next time you take a painkiller. And then there's cannabis. The oldest evidence of intentional cannabis use goes back roughly 10,000 years, to burial pits in Central Asia, charred seeds in ritual contexts. But the find that changed everything came in 2019. Archaeologist Yimin Yang's team analyzed wooden braziers, small enclosed burning chambers, found in ancient tombs in the Pamir Mountains of western China. The tombs dated to around 500 BCE. The braziers still had residue. When they tested it, they found THC, not the low-potency wild cannabis that grows by accident. Cannabis, selectively bred, over generations, to be stronger. The Greek historian Herodotus had written about Scythian people sitting in enclosed tents, burning cannabis on heated stones 5 centuries before Christ. Scholars assumed he was exaggerating. He wasn't. The braziers were exactly what he described. The cannabis was exactly what you'd expect. Someone 2,500 years ago was doing, in a tent in the mountains of Central Asia, something that would feel completely familiar to a person doing the same thing in their apartment tonight. So why? Why did your ancestors, already living in a world with enough to worry about, decide that changing how their minds worked was worth the effort? Here's what the actual evidence shows. The earliest use was almost never recreational. It was ritual. It was medicine. In many cases, it was the most sophisticated technology a culture possessed. A shaman who could enter a controlled altered state and return with specific information: which plant treated which disease, which season was coming. What the rival group across the river was doing wasn't a mystic. They were a specialist with a tool. That worked. Anthropologist Michael Winkelman at Arizona State University spent decades documenting shamanic traditions across cultures that had no contact with each other on every inhabited continent. His finding, the intentional use of psychoactive substances in ritual contexts, is one of the most universal human behaviors ever recorded. It appears independently, with striking similarities in cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years. That kind of pattern doesn't happen by accident. Something that universal is telling you something about what you actually are, and your brain knows it. Your brain didn't evolve a dedicated receptor for cannabis. It already had an endocannabinoid system, a network of receptors that regulate memory, mood, and pain, and cannabis happens to fit into it like a key into a lock. The same is true for opioids. Your brain already produces its own version of morphine, called endorphins. The same is true for psilocybin, the active compound in psychedelic mushrooms, which slots into your serotonin receptors so precisely that some researchers have asked a question that makes neuroscientists genuinely uncomfortable. Did millions of years of contact between your ancestors and these plants leave traces in the architecture of your own brain? No one has answered that yet. But your brain responds to these molecules the way it responds to things it was built to receive. Make of that what you will. So, here's the full picture. 10,000 years ago, someone in Central Asia burned cannabis seeds in a burial pit because they believed it mattered. 8,000 years ago, someone in Western Europe decided a specific flower was worth farming, not for food, but for what it did inside their mind. 5,700 years ago, someone in Texas placed a dried cactus in a ceremonial site with a care that told researchers, thousands of years later, that this was not casual. 3,500 years ago, a shaman in Bolivia assembled a leather pouch with 5 substances and the tools to use them and carried it their whole life. None of them knew about the others. None of them could have. But all of them arrived at the same conclusion. Your ordinary mind is not the only mind you have access to. You still reach for something to change how you feel before your day starts, before meetings, before sleep. The name you give it is different. The molecule might be caffeine instead of mescaline, but the impulse is identical. Your ancestors didn't stumble into this. They built entire traditions around it, entire roles, entire rituals. You just call it your morning routine, and you've never once asked why you need it.